Most people are afraid of being alone, but they never admit that directly. Instead, they fill every quiet moment with noise, music, notifications, endless scrolling, constant conversations, anything to avoid sitting still long enough for their real thoughts to surface. Because deep down, silence frightens people more than chaos ever does. Silence removes distraction. And once distraction disappears, the mind begins revealing truths that have been buried underneath routines, entertainment, obligations, and emotional avoidance for years. There's a moment that happens when you are finally alone long enough with your thoughts. No performance, no audience, no pressure to appear confident, attractive, successful, or emotionally stable. Just you existing quietly in the same room as your own mind. And for most people, that moment becomes unbearable quickly because they suddenly realize how disconnected they have become from themselves internally. But highly intelligent people experience solitude differently. While others use silence to escape boredom temporarily, reflective minds use silence to understand themselves more honestly. Their minds become active in solitude rather than empty. Questions begin forming, emotional patterns begin surfacing, contradictions become impossible to ignore, and slowly their inner world transforms into something far deeper than most people around them ever realize externally. You may have spent years wondering why your mind never fully relaxes in the same way other people's minds seem to. Why ordinary conversations often leave you emotionally unsatisfied. Why shallow environments exhaust you mentally. Why you continue thinking about situations long after everyone else emotionally moved on from them completely. And maybe the answer is simpler than you realize. Your mind naturally processes reality at deeper emotional and psychological levels. Most people stop thinking once external stimulation disappears, but reflective minds continue processing silently underneath the surface. They replay conversations internally, analyze emotional reactions carefully, revisit memories repeatedly, study patterns in human behavior, question assumptions, search for inconsistencies, examine their own emotional contradictions, and because all of this happens quietly, nobody else fully understands how active their inner world actually is. Highly intelligent people are often misunderstood because real intelligence rarely looks dramatic externally. It does not always appear loud, dominant, charismatic, or attention-seeking. Sometimes intelligence appears as quiet observation, emotional awareness, psychological depth, curiosity, patience, reflection, the ability to tolerate uncertainty without rushing toward emotionally comforting conclusions. There are people who cannot spend even 5 minutes alone without immediately reaching for stimulation, because silence forces them to confront unresolved emotions they have been avoiding unconsciously for years. The moment external distraction disappears, anxiety rises, regret surfaces, loneliness appears, emotional discomfort becomes impossible to suppress, so they escape again immediately into noise because facing themselves honestly feels psychologically threatening. But thoughtful people eventually stop running. They stay in the silence longer, long enough to hear thoughts that were buried beneath distraction, long enough to notice emotions hiding beneath routines, long enough to understand that some of the deepest truths about life only appear when the external world finally becomes quiet enough for the internal world to speak clearly. There is something psychologically powerful about learning how to sit alone with your own thoughts without needing to escape yourself constantly. Because eventually, the mind begins revealing emotional patterns you never noticed before. Why certain experiences still hurt years later. Why specific words trigger emotional reactions. Why certain people drain your energy completely while others make you feel emotionally understood without effort. Most people experience emotions unconsciously. They react automatically without examining what those emotions actually mean internally. But reflective minds study emotions carefully. They ask themselves difficult questions. Why did that comment hurt so deeply? Why do I fear rejection so intensely? Why does loneliness affect me differently than it affects other people? Why do I keep repeating certain emotional patterns throughout my relationships? That level of introspection changes a person permanently because awareness removes illusions slowly. You begin recognizing that many of your emotional reactions were never random at all. They were shaped by past experiences, hidden fears, emotional conditioning, childhood wounds, insecurities, unmet needs, and unconscious beliefs you never fully examined honestly before. And suddenly your inner world becomes far more complicated than you originally believed. Because now you are not simply reacting emotionally anymore. You are observing your emotions while they happen. You are studying your thoughts while they form. You are questioning assumptions while other people automatically accept them without hesitation. Psychologists sometimes describe this as metacognition. The ability to observe your own thinking from a distance rather than becoming completely consumed by it unconsciously. And that ability is far rarer than most people realize because most individuals never separate themselves from their thoughts long enough to analyze them objectively. Highly intelligent people often carry enormous emotional depth internally while appearing calm externally. Their silence gets mistaken for simplicity when in reality their minds are constantly active beneath the surface. Observing, reflecting, analyzing, connecting invisible patterns, searching for deeper meaning behind ordinary human behavior. Sometimes you probably notice things about people that others completely miss. Tiny shifts in tone, emotional inconsistencies, forced confidence, hidden sadness beneath humor, insecurity disguised as arrogance, emotional tension hidden beneath polite conversations, and over time your awareness becomes almost automatic. You start sensing emotional truths long before logical explanations fully catch up. That level of observation changes how you experience relationships completely. Because once you begin recognizing hidden emotional dynamics clearly, it becomes difficult to interact superficially anymore. You start noticing how much of ordinary social behavior is driven by insecurity, fear, validation seeking, emotional defense mechanisms, and unconscious emotional pain. Many people perform confidence externally while internally feeling emotionally lost. Many people chase validation because they secretly fear inadequacy. Many people avoid silence because they are terrified of confronting unresolved emotions honestly. And once you understand that psychologically, human behavior begins making far more sense emotionally. But awareness also creates emotional exhaustion. Because once your mind learns how to see psychological patterns clearly, it becomes impossible to fully ignore them afterward. You notice contradictions everywhere. People saying one thing while emotionally wanting another. Individuals pretending certainty while internally feeling confused. Relationships built entirely around emotional dependency rather than genuine connection. Sometimes you probably wish you could stop thinking so deeply for a while because awareness can feel emotionally heavy. You notice truths others comfortably ignore. You question systems other people automatically accept. You recognize emotional dishonesty faster than before. And eventually your mind becomes unable to fully participate in superficiality without feeling emotionally disconnected internally. That is one reason highly intelligent people often become quieter over time. Not because they dislike humanity, not because they believe they are superior, but because they realize not every thought needs to be expressed publicly. Not every disagreement deserves emotional energy. Not every person genuinely wants truth. Many people simply want emotional comfort, validation, certainty, or distraction. And mature intelligence slowly learns the difference between people searching for understanding and people protecting their existing beliefs emotionally. Fragile minds defend certainty aggressively because uncertainty threatens identity. But thoughtful minds remain psychologically flexible because they care more about truth than ego preservation. There is enormous emotional maturity in admitting you might be wrong about something important. Most people avoid questioning themselves deeply because self-examination threatens their emotional identity. But reflective minds revisit their beliefs constantly. They test assumptions internally. They challenge their own perspectives privately. They search for contradictions in their own thinking instead of only criticizing others externally. That habit separates intellectual honesty from insecurity. Insecurity fears being wrong because self-worth feels fragile. Intellectual honesty welcomes correction because learning matters more than appearing perfect. And the smartest people usually understand this deeply. Real intelligence is not blind confidence in your own mind. It is awareness of how easily the human mind can deceive itself emotionally. Human thinking is incredibly biased by fear, insecurity, emotional attachment, social pressure, pride, trauma, and unconscious self-protection. Most people never fully realize how distorted perception can become once emotions attach themselves to beliefs. But reflective people notice those distortions slowly because they spend enormous amounts of time observing themselves internally. Sometimes you replay conversations repeatedly afterward, wondering whether you misunderstood something emotionally important. Not because you are weak, not because you are obsessive, but because your mind naturally searches for clarity beneath surface-level interaction. You care about understanding reality accurately rather than simply protecting pride emotionally. That internal reflection often creates growth quietly over time. You revisit old memories years later and suddenly realize they meant something completely different than you originally believed. A painful rejection becomes emotional redirection. A failure becomes necessary transformation. A heartbreak becomes the experience that forced deeper self-awareness into your life permanently. Highly intelligent minds constantly reinterpret the past because awareness evolves continuously. Your understanding of your life changes as your emotional maturity changes. You begin seeing hidden lessons inside experiences that once only felt painful. And slowly, your relationship with your own history transforms entirely. Most people never revisit old emotional experiences honestly because doing so feels uncomfortable psychologically. But reflective minds return repeatedly because they understand that insight often appears years after the experience itself happened. Emotional understanding matures slowly. Wisdom develops gradually through reflection, not instantly through experience alone. You may have noticed that your greatest realizations often arrive unexpectedly during quiet moments. Walking alone late at night, sitting silently by a window, lying awake while the rest of the world sleeps, driving alone without distractions. Moments where silence finally becomes deep enough for subconscious understanding to rise into awareness naturally. Those moments may appear insignificant externally, but psychologically they are deeply active states. Your brain continues integrating emotional experiences, organizing memories, detecting patterns, refining understanding, and processing unresolved thoughts beneath conscious awareness constantly. Stillness often becomes the environment where insight quietly forms. Modern life makes this increasingly difficult because the world constantly encourages distraction, endless entertainment, endless notifications, endless stimulation, endless opinions, endless scrolling. Most people rarely spend enough uninterrupted time alone to hear their own deeper thoughts clearly anymore. But reflective people naturally return inward repeatedly because their minds crave understanding more than distraction. Questions fascinate them, emotional complexity interests them, psychological depth attracts them naturally. Their curiosity is not always practical. Sometimes they become deeply interested in subjects that provide absolutely no social advantage whatsoever. And strangely, that kind of curiosity often signals higher intelligence more clearly than external achievement alone. Because transactional minds only pursue what benefits them visibly. But intellectually alive minds pursue understanding simply because learning itself feels meaningful internally. Highly intelligent people are often fascinated by things that most individuals completely overlook. Human behavior, emotional contradictions, philosophy, meaning, consciousness, patterns in relationships, psychological symbolism, the invisible emotional structures underneath ordinary life. While other people seek stimulation constantly, reflective minds often seek understanding instead. They want to know why people behave the way they do, why suffering changes personality, why loneliness affects certain individuals differently, why some people spend their entire lives avoiding themselves emotionally. And perhaps the strangest realization of all is understanding how few people genuinely want deep self-awareness. Many individuals prefer distraction over reflection because self-awareness requires emotional courage. It requires facing uncomfortable truths about yourself honestly without immediately escaping into denial, blame, or emotional avoidance. But your mind keeps searching anyway, even when awareness becomes emotionally exhausting, even when understanding creates loneliness. Even when insight forces painful realizations about relationships, identities, emotional wounds, fears, or personal patterns you previously ignored unconsciously. That willingness to face reality honestly instead of constantly escaping from it is one of the strongest signs of psychological maturity that exists. Because intelligence is not only about processing information quickly, it is about tolerating emotional complexity without collapsing into self-deception. Highly intelligent people often feel emotionally different from others because their internal conversations operate at unusual depth. They are constantly balancing logic with emotion, empathy with boundaries, awareness with exhaustion, curiosity with loneliness, honesty with self-protection. Their minds rarely stop processing reality beneath the surface. And sometimes they secretly wish they could turn their thoughts off completely for a little while because deep awareness is not always peaceful. Sometimes it means noticing problems everyone else ignores. Sometimes it means questioning systems others blindly accept. Sometimes it means feeling emotionally isolated because your inner world operates differently than the people around you. But despite all of that, reflective minds continue searching, continue questioning, continue growing, continue evolving internally because something inside them refuses superficial understanding completely. They cannot pretend not to see emotional truth once they recognize it clearly. And maybe that is the clearest sign of all. Intelligence is not about knowing everything already. It is about remaining open enough emotionally and psychologically to keep learning forever, even in silence, even alone, even when nobody else notices the growth happening internally. Because in the end, the deepest forms of intelligence were never meant to become performances. Real intelligence often happens privately, quietly, in moments where someone sits alone with their own thoughts honestly and chooses reflection instead of distraction, growth instead of denial, truth instead of comfort, awareness instead of avoidance. And there is something almost paradoxical about that kind of intelligence. The more aware someone becomes psychologically, the less interested they usually become in proving themselves constantly to other people. Because awareness eventually reveals how much ordinary social behavior is built around performance rather than authenticity. People exaggerate certainty to appear confident. They imitate opinions to feel accepted socially. They chase validation because insecurity temporarily disappears when approval appears externally. And reflective minds begin seeing these patterns everywhere once their awareness deepens enough psychologically. You may notice yourself becoming quieter over time, more selective with energy, less interested in attention, less interested in arguing endlessly with people committed to misunderstanding you emotionally. And psychologically, those changes often reflect maturity rather than emotional withdrawal. Because intelligence eventually teaches something important. Not every disagreement deserves engagement. Not every opinion deserves emotional reaction. Not every person is emotionally capable of understanding the depth of what you are trying to communicate internally. That awareness changes your relationship with silence entirely. Silence stops feeling empty. Silence starts feeling intelligent, peaceful, necessary, restorative. You begin understanding why thoughtful people throughout history protected solitude carefully, because uninterrupted thinking creates space for deeper understanding to emerge naturally. And maybe that explains why your mind feels most alive during moments other people consider ordinary, walking quietly alone at night, watching rain against a window, sitting silently with your thoughts, reflecting on life while the world rushes distractedly around you without noticing the depth hidden inside stillness itself.
Like to learn more about human psychology? Like, comment, and share this video. Subscribe my channel now. Thank you for watching.